I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast. It feels like lately I've been picking up guests in the most random of places. You know, last episode, it was an elevator at a conference, and now this next guest I picked up at a yoga retreat. I'm so excited to welcome director, producer, and writer Robin Bicknell. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Sarah.
So a little bit of our origin story. We just came off a yoga retreat in Tuscany, Italy, and the person running the retreat said, "Yeah, there's a couple media people on the trip. I bet you're going to connect really well with some of these ladies." And Robin and I got talking about what she's been working on, and I thought, "Damn, like we have to talk about this." So to start, it's a very special day today. We are recording on Thursday, June 12th, and this is the day that your 6-episode series that you wrote and directed for A&E premieres, The Secrets of the Bunny Ranch. And I just would love to know how you're feeling because it's a big day for you.
I'm really excited. It's been a long road to get here. It was a year and a half. And then before that, it was another year and a half of research, trying to find the women who would speak out after so many years. I think they're really brave, and it's going to be a different story of the Bunny Ranch than people would have heard on HBO's Cathouse, which is a reality show that played for 10 years from inside this Nevada brothel.
Yeah, so let's get into that a little more. I mean, we'll dive into your media career and how you found yourself producing, writing, and directing. But for anyone who's not familiar, Cathouse was basically like a series that brought prostitution to North American living rooms. Do I have that right?
100%. I think most people had never stepped foot inside a brothel, and maybe had sort of like a secret desire to, but would never take the drive outside of Vegas or Reno to do so. There's only one state in the US where it's legal, and in that state, there's only certain counties. But yeah, HBO brought brothels and prostitution into America's living rooms.
Yeah, and this goes back to June 2005. And at the time, I think it was like kind of sold as a more lighthearted look at all this stuff and the employees at Moonlight Bunny Ranch being at the center of it. But there's all sorts of problems that came out of that. And the women who are speaking out, like, I'm curious how this project that premieres tonight connects back to that. Like, did someone approach someone to say, I need to tell my story? Like, how did this next documentary series get written?
Well, we, had a long relationship. The company I'm working with A&E, and they have a Secrets of brand. They've done Secrets of Playboy and Secrets of Prince Andrew, and there's a sort of well-established kind of strand there. And we discovered that no one had really done a deep dive into Dennis Hoff. Dennis Hoff is the guy who runs the Moonlight Bunny Ranch, or ran it. He is now deceased, and was hell-bent on making kind of like a brothel monopoly across Nevada. And he was a media whore, for lack of a better term. He would get his mug on anything that would show him, because it's illegal to advertise prostitution in Nevada, but it ain't illegal to go in the media. So he was on Oprah, Tyra, Sally Jesse, CNN. Howard Stern loved him and his working girls, as you can well imagine, in the shock jock era. And so, yeah, he started getting known, and HBO came calling and thought, oh, let's do a show about this guy. And he positioned himself in a way as a liberator. He's going to destigmatize prostitution. He's going to take it from guilt and shame to glamour and fame, right? And the women are business women, and they're entrepreneurs, and they can charge their own rates. They have agency. Empowerment, exactly. And in reality, the sad reality is that it was the exact opposite, which isn't really shocking, kind of post Me Too, but everybody bought it, hook, line, and sinker. They bought it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, so did a lot of young women who are watching the show. And they
Mhm.
thought, oh my gosh, I come from a broken home. My maybe there's some abuse that's happening. I'm not very rich. And I can go to this place that looks like a sorority. It's packaged like a sitcom. Everyone looks like they're having fun and making loads of money. And Dennis Hoff looks like kind of a teddy bear daddy pimp in a way. Like he's kind of gross, but
Mhm.
a jolly fella. Um,
Yeah.
and in reality, chances are good if as soon as you step in the door, he's going to force you to have sex with him for free. And that's
Yeah.
day one. It just goes down from there.
And so all these sex workers from Cathouse are now accusing the producers of that show of misrepresentation, exploitation, and like essentially encouraging these young, vulnerable women into prostitution.
Yeah, and not only that, just the normalization of it, sort of like, or
Yeah.
the glamorization of it, because it was in HBO's interest to have late night titillating viewing. They had all kinds of it, right? And it's a subscription driven platform back in the day, right? It was pay per view, and they got
Yeah.
subscriptions. This was like in early days of Sopranos before it was the juggernaut that it is now, right? And
Mhm.
how did people go to HBO? Boxing and late night sex. And it was really only the success of The Sopranos that launched it into a different sort of high tier stratosphere. But you can say, or I can say, that they built their network off the backs of these prostitutes because it aired right
Mm.
after Sopranos, right? So they had a built-in audience, millions and millions of people watched it, and they didn't pay them unless they had sex on camera. And if they had sex on camera, it was like a measly couple $100.
Ugh, so
It's so
gross.
gross. Yeah,
Okay, so you're tasked with telling this side of the story
yeah.
now. So, yeah, continue along. How did that sort of unravel?
So I got asked to once it had been greenlit, I got asked to direct it, and I had to get up to speed on the Bunny Ranch and Dennis Hoff, and because like I had vague, like most people have a vague, like I think I've heard of that place, I think I've heard of that guy.
Yeah.
But as soon as I started digging into it, it was like, oh my god! Like every time you thought it can't get weirder, it can't get worse, it just got worse and weirder, right? Like he's at one point
Yeah.
he ran for politics. He was elected to legislative assembly posthumously after he died. He got elected. Um, there was
Jeez.
a murder that happened called the Cathouse murders involving gangs in Oklahoma City. Lamar Odom had his infamous OD in one of his brothels. It was the most Googled
Oh.
hit of 2015 was that OD. It was like everywhere because, of course, he was on the Kardashians. And um, so it's just like an endless, in some ways, for, a TV series, it's the best thing because it's so rich. But on the other hand, it was harrowing because it was so awful. And,
Yeah.
nobody's kind of called it out in a really big way. It just was let
Yeah.
to happen. And no one was looking after these women, you know? Some of them
Yeah.
would go to the cops and say, I just started work and Dennis Hoff raped me. And they'd go, yeah. And what's your point? Literally. Like, that's what you signed up to do.
Oh God, the list of people who are complicit in this is probably quite long.
Yes, it is. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went off on a tangent there, but
No, no. And so like what does research look like for a project like this? I'm so intrigued about like how you prepare to tell that story.
so there is we had a kick ass researcher, like amazing. And you have to know like all the rules around prostitution, like the bylaws. You have to know everything that the cops have jurisdiction over and don't have jurisdiction over. The most important thing is the first person testimonies of people who are actually in the place. Because, there's a lot of hearsay. There's a lot of people saying, I heard that so and so said that her cousin said, right? Lots of it.
Yeah.
But you really have to get it from the horse's mouth, like the drivers, the bartenders, the publicist for the Bunny Ranch, multiple sex workers we talked to. And even then, you have to verify their stories. Lots of times people are traumatized and their version
Yeah.
of reality is, to no fault of their own, slightly skewed. So, yeah, in order for it to be have journalistic integrity, you really need to do your homework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How close to those interviews are you?
So, in terms of, you mean how close am I to the interviewees?
Yeah, like how close to that process are you? Like, are you there when the interviews are happening? Are you preparing whoever's
I
doing? Are
I
you doing the
conducted all
interview?
of them, all
Okay.
40 of them. I went on an American road trip and drove across Nevada and went to people's living rooms and homes. I interviewed crew
Oh my
members from
gosh.
Cathouse, from New York to Nevada to California, and sat across from each one of these women and when they told their stories. So very, very close.
Very
Very, very
close.
close.
Tell me about the first story that like hit you in the gut. I know they all do, but like just give me, one that had you sitting there shocked.
I would say that the story, one Jennifer O'Kane, who's a sex worker who's escaping her very abusive husband, which is also the case, is what happens. She was
Mhm.
attracted by the idea that there would be barricades around a house with cameras that this guy couldn't get in, because of course he'd said, threatened to kill her if she ever left. So she enters into this, not ever having done prostitution before. She's in her late 20s or early 30s, and she was immediately raped on night one by Hoff, she alleges.
Mhm.
And she's the one that went to the police the next day and they just turned her away. And she said, she looked like right in the camera and said, that's the day I understood what a prostitute is. You're the dirt under people's feet. No one cares about you. No one's coming. No one's listening. And a prostitute can't be raped, right? Because it's sort of like
Mhm.
there's so much shame involved. So that was shocking. But then it went further in that she like got beat up by some of the other prostitutes in the house.
Oh.
It's a sort of this like toxic competitive environment that is completely fostered by Dennis. Um, yeah, and then she finally escaped, but as she was driving out with her U-Haul, they jumped her, and she woke up in the hospital with grand mal seizures, which she's still having today. And she was only
Oh.
6 months in there. Some of these
Yeah,
women
like
are
this is a
years.
shorter story.
Yeah, some of the
Yeah.
women are years and years and years. Yeah.
When you're conducting interviews for a project like this, how do you take care of your own mental health? You're living it and reliving it with them.
I think it's important to have like lots of conversations. Like I had a really great solid crew around me. And whenever someone was feeling triggered or stressed, we'd talk about it. We had access to therapists and we just had a
Yeah.
great, great time on the road. Like when we weren't dealing with the horror show, we were like having great meals and listening to music and having like little dance parties at the end of the
Oh, I've seen
day.
those.
Like I think it's really,
Yeah.
yeah. And then just calling back to the producers going, okay, so I was like verbally assaulted today. And they talk
Yeah.
you down.
Yeah. And what like prepares you to go into a field like this to begin with? So now we're going to backtrack a little bit. How did you find yourself in this line of work and producing these real stories? I mean, I will say that some of the women on our retreat, when you and I were not in this discussion, it was them just telling me how talented you
Oh,
were, and you weren't in the room. They said that you are so empathetic to the person or the people that you are working with, that you make an incredible storyteller. So where does that come from? How did you end up here?
well, I mean, I was brought up in a very strange way in a cult. And I think I had a lot of, as a child, survival mechanisms that involved reading people's faces and emotions, trying to track how people are feeling and navigate my way diplomatically around big personalities. I have a hypersensitive antenna to begin with. And then I also
Mhm.
don't assume that I know anything about you, right? Because people don't look at me and think, oh, she was brought up as a Sikh. She probably wore a turban on her head for the first, 15 years of her life, and she learned Punjabi, uh, you know. So I don't assume that I know who you are. And I think a lot of people do that, even
Yep.
subconsciously. They make prejudgments, and so I think that combination. Plus, I'm a very good listener. I'm a good talker, but a good listener. Um, yeah, and I guess I'm just empathetic. Like if you started crying right now, I just start crying. That's just what happens to me. So in the middle of interviews, if people get emotional, then I'll get emotional, and then it's like I'm like a mirror reflecting back their emotion to them, and then it kind of like, and then they're like, oh, okay, she really, trusts, like believes me, and then it just
Yeah.
cracks open, is what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. So what sort of informed like your first step into directing and actually putting this kind of innate sense that you have into your work?
Well, I'm empathetic, but I'm also kind of like very nicely bossy. Like I really like to have everything in control. Like I like to be in control. And I found this out when I was
Yeah.
14. I thought I wanted to be an actress, so I was in drama class. And
Oh,
yeah,
love
and
it.
one of the exercises was like, now you're going to direct all the whole room. And I was like, oh my god, this is a thing that I can do. I love this. And so I decided when I was 14 I was going to be a director, and I went to school for it. And I just, halfway through university, I hadn't graduated yet, and I started working with a documentary company. And they, were amazing and gave me chances and opportunities that I think young people don't get now, because the broadcasters
Yeah.
didn't used to like lord over every aspect. They just hire a production company to do the job. And it was their job to hire the director and whatever. So I was given the chance to do a 1 hour documentary for A&E. I was
Okay.
27, and I'd never directed an hour of television before. And this was airing on their America Undercover strand. Like it was a big deal. And my boss at the time said, look, there's this illegal street racing going on outside my house in King City. If you can figure out who's doing it and get into the subculture, I'll let you direct the show. So I was like, how am I going to figure this out? So I went to a strip joint because I thought,
That's a
yeah.
good
So I
spot
went
to
to a
find.
strip joint, for your eyes only, down on King Street. And I just talked to the bouncer, and I was like, listen, I'm trying to find, these street racers. And he's like, oh, you got to go to this body shop. This is where they get all their parts. So I go to the body shop,
Mm.
and then I start just hanging around. I meet the guys, and I'm like, show me your fast car. And then they did. And then I got in. And then my boss was like, oh, shit, now I have to let you direct this thing. And then I made it. It was so popular, and it was about 2 years before Fast and the Furious franchise.
I was just about to bring
Yeah,
up Fast and Furious. I was like, this is before this even
yeah,
happened.
and if you watch my doc and then you watch Fast and the Furious, it's like it's just they just ripped it off. Like I had a tall guy with a bald head who was against another guy with the dark hair and the smaller car and the whole thing.
That's a nice feather in your
Right.
cap. I love
Yeah,
this.
so that's how it started.
Okay. So that was called The Need
The
for
Need
Speed,
for
right?
Speed.
That one?
Yeah.
And you've gone on to have so many nominations and awards and accolades. Which of all the series that you've produced, and you've worked with all the major broadcasters, is maybe one of those series that was closer to your heart?
I made a film called Black Watch Snipers, which was about a regiment, a Canadian regiment in the Second World War. And we started out just making a film about the regiment itself because it had one of the largest casualty rates. And as we were doing the interviews, There were only three. There was only like 12 people left of like 5,000 originally. And of those 12 people still alive and lucid, four of them were part of the same small sniper unit and went through the whole war together as like a band of brothers who, and they were called scouts. So they'd go ahead of the major battalion, and they had a very dangerous
Scout the
job.
scene.
So I ended up making this very, very intense, tight film about a band of brothers, all told straight to the camera by these veterans. And it's just like, it's so moving. You can see it on YouTube. It's one of my things I'm most proud of. And you can't not, like, by the end of it, if you're not like crying your eyes out, you're not a human being.
We'll put the link to that specific series for sure in the show notes, along with many others if you want to check out Robin's work. Is there a World War II connection in your family?
I wouldn't say really directly. My Italian side of my family, because my mom remarried, he was actually a fighter pilot for the Italians.
Okay.
Yeah, I think my American family sort of never got deployed. My grandfather was in the army because everybody was, but yeah.
Yeah, my
No,
grandfather
just
too.
over the
Yeah.
course of many years of making films, I've had a lot of history and World War II
Yeah.
docs. I now know a lot about it. And it's, yeah.
Yeah. The other one that was a World War II sort of central story. What was that called again? It was
D-Day?
the Camp
Oh,
X
yeah.
Secret Agent School.
Camp X. So
Yeah.
Camp X, as you know, was located right here in Whitby. And it was
Shit.
a precursor to the CIA. Because the US hadn't entered the war yet, they wanted a secret spy school like the British had
Mm.
in North America, but they couldn't do it in the US, so they started it up here in Whitby. And yeah, all kinds of British writers were involved in the setting up of it. They basically created spycraft. The beginnings of James Bond, like the very stories about James Bond, were started here in Whitby.
No, Whitby,
Yeah,
Ontario. This
I
is
know.
crazy.
It's a great film. It's a great film. It was on Smithsonian Channel. I think it was on BBC. It was in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, super fun.
So, like, what haven't you done yet in documentary? Like, where do you want to go next?
That's a good question. I really loved this series because it was a little more investigative than what I normally do, which is a more sort of broad scope historical. And so I'd love to do a little more of that. I'm not as like super keen on the true crime if it's all gory and murders, and oftentimes the victims are women, and I find sometimes it's like, okay, let's just tell another story about a woman getting murdered
Yeah, it
in
feels
the back of a car.
yeah.
But this kind of thing, like uncovering injustice, and looking too at, how we're all complicit sometimes, like we all watch this stuff. We all jumped on the bandwagon, we all made fun of Britney Spears when she shaved her head in public and was crying out for help, right? She's having a mental health breakdown. Like I like having philosophical conversations with how we're interacting with our own entertainment.
I also feel I already said this to you, but I feel like you have a book and a podcast in you, and there's so much more to the Robin Bicknell story. But before we wrap, like I'm curious. This is the Women in Media podcast. I'm curious about your experience as a woman in this field. Have you always felt safe? Have you always felt respected?
Well, no, Sarah. In fact, the very first directing gig I got, emails went out that I was going to come on set. I was doing these sort of like behind the scenes when all these movies were filming in Toronto, and I'd go interview the gaffer or like the art department, and it was on showcase television. Anyway, so the emails would go out, and without fail, I'd show up on set, and people would reach their hand out for the DP, who they thought was Robin, because there's no way in hell I could be the director when they saw me, right?
Right.
I looked young when I was young, younger than I was, but plus I was a woman, right? And I had,
Yeah.
creepy producers try to, you know, be, get me to sit in their lap, and I've had other people
Ugh.
pat me on the head and call me dear, when I had an opinion. So
Yeah.
all that stuff. Like the list is endless, to be honest. It's
Yeah.
better now, but it's still there. It's still there. When you're in a room, and if there's a man on your team, oftentimes the eyeballs are on him. It's
Yeah.
just
That's so
how it
true.
is.
Yeah. Tell me about a time that's sort of like burned into your memories where you were able to effectively put someone in their place that was disrespecting you.
Ooh, wow, there's a couple of those. I think it's not so much disrespect, but um,
Or doubting
doubting.
maybe.
Um, I just think that sometimes I like quietly do my job without being like big about it. For example, I interviewed the director of photography for Cathouse. Okay. And
Okay.
I don't think he knew when he came into the room what it was he was going to spill. Because I think he started out going, talking about it as sort of like this funny, quirky thing he did back in the day, and how times have changed. But 4 hours later, he admitted that he has great guilt, and that his images likely recruited young women into prostitution, and he feels responsible for that. And he was it was very raw, and I don't think he expected that to happen. So I feel like, that's kind of my superpower. I'll just quietly, I'm not like
Yeah.
a gotcha person, but three
No.
hours later, you're going to tell me the truth, then you don't even realize
Yeah.
it's going to happen. And at the end of it, he was like, oh my God, I need a hug. That was so hard. And yeah. And when you watch the series, you'll see he's an amazing interview. But I don't think he knew what was coming.
Yeah, no shit. So we'll have the links in the show notes to find out more about the show. If you're someone who doesn't have cable, because that's a thing right now, you can still get it in the A&E app. And yeah, is there anything that you want listeners to know about this series that maybe isn't in a press release or a write up on the internet right now
I think I
before
just
we?
want to say that, you know, these women are incredible survivors, that what they've been through, even before they show up at a brothel, is the stuff of nightmares, right? Because oftentimes the women, and not all, I don't want to paint with a brush, but in my experience, having interviewed many, 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 there's history of child abuse, there's all kinds of trauma in their childhood that
Yeah.
sets them off on that path. And what they survived and put up with and deflected and navigated around, and then had the balls to talk to me, right? I just want to say kudos to these women who often are treated like dirt, and they're anything but. Yeah,
And when you win the award and you hold up the award and you say, "This is going out to all the
that's
women
right.
I interviewed."
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah, it's for
It
them.
is
It's
for
for
them.
them.
Yeah.
Okay, last question on the podcast always is tell me about some amazing women in media that you admire who you think should come on and tell their stories on this podcast.
Well, the my executive producer is also a very long time friend of mine, and she is now part owner of the company. And she started a post production company, of which there's almost no women that run post production companies. And she got the CSAs changed to have a color correction award and all kinds of stuff. She's a
Lots of
powerhouse of
advocating.
a woman. In fact, this series is dedicated to her mother, who had just passed away, who ran shelters for young women and prostitutes.
Mm.
So Elizabeth Trojan, I would say, would be a great interview for you. She has a great story. Um, and I would say Tess Gerard, who was my DP on the series. She's an amazing cinematographer, and has worked really hard to get here. And it's like a man's world,
Oh yeah,
cinematographer,
yeah.
and she's got a great vision. Yeah, she's just shoots like nobody I've ever worked with, and we had like an right away. We didn't even have to talk to each other. Like I knew exactly what she was doing. She knew exactly what I wanted, and then we would have these code things, and then the whole crew would be very confused because they're like, what's happening?" And like, where are we going?" And we'd be like, "What was it? The thing with the thing over there. Come on."
Yeah,
And but we had a great time together too on the road, and some great
yeah.
debriefs. Yeah. Um, who else? Oh my gosh, so many women.
I know this is the hardest question of all the
It
interview
really
questions, I
is.
know.
Like I could go on. I got a list of hundreds. Brilliant writer I've worked with also worked on this series. Her name is Julia Nunes. She can write anything. Like if you give her a magazine article, she'll write it and she'll win the award. If you give her like a drama script, she'll write that. If you give her a documentary, she'll write it. She's amazing. And yeah, and she had a terrible concussion in the middle of her career, what at the same time that her son had a concussion, and she has an amazing story working through that period. And it's amazing what women can do when
It is
it's
amazing.
amazing. Like
It is
how anyone
amazing.
got through that was anyway. So if you want more recommendations, I have
Y-
105.
Yeah. I'll be coming
Yeah.
to you an email after this. Well, congratulations on the premiere and the release finally of this project that you've been holding so tight for a year and a half. Just hearing about it, over amazing homemade
Yes.
pasta in Tuscany was enough for me to be hooked, but it's at the cost of what these women have gone through, and your care with the story, I'm sure, is very appreciated. So, thank you for sharing all that today.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad I met you in our little retreat.